There are stories we never tell not because they aren't worth sharing, but because saying them out loud would be like reopening a wound that never quite healed. This is one of those stories. It begins not with fireworks or vows or celebration, but with silence. The kind of silence that swallows a man whole. Tom Walker wasn't the type of man people noticed. In the town of Cedar Hollow, he was dependable, steady, someone who always showed up, did his job, and kept to himself. But if you'd looked just a little closer, you'd have seen it. The slow unraveling of a life once full of promise Tom used to believe in forever. He built a home from the ground up with his own two hands, poured his memories and sweat into every nail and plank. That house was supposed to be the start of something beautiful, a life shared with the woman he loved, Emma. But the truth is, even the strongest homes can't survive when the foundation of love begins to rot. She left on a Tuesday, no warning, no tears. Just a note on the kitchen table and the closet half empty. She was moving to New York, she said. She'd met someone who understood her, someone who made her feel alive. And she was taking the savings, not because she needed it, but because, in her words, I've earned it. You owe me for the years I wasted here. Wasted. That word hit him harder than any slap. After she was gone, the silence in the house changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore, it was accusing. Every creaking floorboard, every pile of laundry left untouched, every shadow stretching across the hallway at dusk whispered the same thing: you weren't enough. Tom tried to hold himself together, but something inside him had snapped. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, he just stopped trying. He sold the livestock, let the garden die. The dishes piled up in the sink, whiskey became his only company, a bitter companion he reached for every night, not to celebrate, but to forget. He didn't want to feel the cold side of the bed or the ghost of her laughter echoing through the halls. People in town started whispering, you know how small towns are. One day he's the guy who helps fix your tractor, the next he's that man who smells like whiskey at 10 a.m., who looks like he hasn't slept in days. No one asked what happened, no one really wanted to know. There was a time, not so long ago, when Tom used to sit on the porch swing after dinner with Emma, talking about dreams and family and how many kids they might have one day. Now, the porch swing hung still and rusted, and Tom couldn't look at it without his chest tightening. His house, once warm, full of color and life, was now a monument to broken promises. The wedding photos still hung on the walls, not because he couldn't take them down, but because doing so would mean acknowledging it was over. That she wasn't coming back, that she never intended to. Most nights, Tom sat at the edge of his bed, staring into the void, fingers curled around a half-empty glass, hoping sleep would come before the memories did. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes he saw her in his dreams smiling, beautiful, unreachable. And sometimes he woke up shouting her name, drenched in sweat, the bed still cold on her side. The truth is, men like Tom don't usually break loudly. They don't beg, they don't fight, they collapse quietly, in slow motion. And by the time someone notices, it's already too late. But the world has a cruel way of keeping score. One cold morning, his old pickup wouldn't start. The engine coughed and wheezed like a dying thing. Tom popped the hood with the weariness of a man who had nothing left to be surprised by. That's when Mrs. Carey, his elderly neighbor, shuffled up the driveway. She didn't say much, just looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "She's gone, Tom. You don't have to punish yourself forever." He wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because somewhere deep down, he knew she was right. He just didn't know what to do with that truth. This story isn't about a man who falls in love. It's about a man who loses everything: his wife, his pride, his sense of self, and has to face a terrifying question. What if this is all there is? What if you gave your heart, built your home, stayed loyal, and still ended up alone? If you've ever loved someone who left without explanation. If you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered where the best parts of you disappeared to. If you've ever asked, what now? Then maybe this story is for you. Because sometimes rock bottom isn't where you die, it's where the real story begins. If this touched something in you, if you're curious about what happens next in Tom's journey, hit that subscribe button. Your support keeps stories like this alive and helps us bring you more heartfelt narratives that speak to the soul. Now here's a question to reflect on. I'd love to see your thoughts in the comments. If someone walks out of your life without a word, what's the better path? A. Close the door and never look back. B. Leave the door open, in case they return changed. Comment your answer below. Or B. And tell me why, if you're brave enough. The road was slick with rain and shadows. Tom's truck rumbled down the empty stretch of highway that curved through the hills just outside Cedar Hollow. It was the kind of night that had pressed against the windshield with a heaviness, the kind of night when loneliness seemed louder than usual. The wipers clicked back and forth like a metronome counting time that no longer meant much to him. He was supposed to go straight home after the last delivery, a simple trip, in and out, but something kept him circling the outer roads, like he was avoiding something waiting for him at the end of the drive. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the ghost of Emma that still clung to every shadow inside that house. He didn't know. He just kept driving. It was during one of those loops that he saw them. At first, it didn't register. Just a vague shape in the darker flicker of movement illuminated by the truck's high beams. He eased off the gas, squinting through the rain. That's when he saw her, a young woman, drenched, standing at the edge of the road. And beside her, a small boy, no older than 5, clinging to the folds of her coat. Tom's heart jerked in his chest. He pulled over hard, the tires skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. The truck rocked with the gusts of wind as he opened the door and stepped out. Cold rain lashed at his face. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he shouted over the wind, voice half concerned, half incredulous. "It's freezing." The woman didn't flinch. She looked up slowly, eyes hollow, soaked to the bone. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. "We don't have anywhere to go." Tom hesitated. There was something in the way she said it, not desperation, not a plea. Just the truth, bare and unsweetened. He looked down at the boy. The child was shaking, his lips tinged blue. "Get in," Tom said, motioning to the passenger door. "Come on, before you freeze to death." They climbed in, the woman keeping her arms wrapped tightly around the boy as if her own body could shield him from the storm. For a while, they drove in silence, the kind that settles between strangers who are afraid to speak because words might make things worse. He didn't ask questions at first. There were too many. Who was she? Where were they from? What happened? But none of those questions felt appropriate, not with the boy curled up, trying to sleep, and not with the woman watching the road like she was trying not to fall apart. After a few miles, she spoke. "My name is Scarlett. This is my son, Johnny." Tom gave a small nod. "Tom, just Tom." Scarlett glanced at him. "Thank you for stopping." He shrugged. Didn't feel like a choice. When they pulled into the driveway of his old farmhouse, Tom hesitated. He looked at the clock. It was late. The nearest shelter would be closed. The idea of leaving them outside again, even if it meant driving to a motel or figuring something else out, felt wrong. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a set of keys. "That's my place," he said, pointing to the dimly lit porch. "I won't be staying there tonight, but it's warm. There's a stove you can light, maybe some food in the pantry. Not much, but enough to get you through the night." Scarlett stared at the keys in his hand, her eyes wide. "You're just ... giving us your house?" Tom nodded slowly. "Just for tonight. You look like you need it more than I do." She took the keys, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," Tom replied. "Just take care of the boy, that's all." He drove off before she could say anything more, unsure whether what he'd done was generous or foolish. It wasn't until he was halfway down the road that the old fear crept in. What if they stole something? What if she wasn't who she seemed? But he couldn't shake the image of Johnny, soaked and shivering. That was all that mattered. The next day, after finishing his work early, Tom returned home with a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety. As he pulled into the driveway, something felt ... different. The lights inside were on. There was a faint glow behind the curtains. He climbed the porch steps quietly and peeked through the window. He froze. The living room was clean. Not just tidy but clean, the kind of clean that speaks of care. The stacks of unopened mail, the dusty mantle, the dishes he'd left in the sink, it was all gone. Replaced by order and warmth. There was a pot simmering on the stove, and the smell of something savory filled the air. Scarlett sat on the couch, reading aloud from an old children's book. Johnny was curled beside her under a blanket, eyes wide, listening intently. Tom's hand fell from the doorknob. He had no idea how long he stood there. All he knew was that something shifted inside him, a crack in the numbness. A flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. When he finally stepped inside, Scarlett stood quickly. "I hope you don't mind," she said, a bit breathless. "I cleaned up, and I made dinner, I thought. You might like something warm." Tom looked around, then at her, then back at the boy who was peeking shyly from behind the blanket. "I didn't expect all this," he said. "We didn't expect kindness," she replied. "Guess we're even." He gave a faint smile. "Dinner smells great." They sat at the table in silence, eating slowly, the clatter of forks and the sound of the storm outside the only noise between them. Afterward, as Johnny began to drift off, Scarlett stood and led him to the spare bedroom. Tom poured 2 cups of tea while she was gone. When she returned, her eyes looked tired, but there was a softness in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Stay," he said, quietly. "As long as you need. I'm barely home anyway. It's just for walls and a roof." "But it doesn't have to be cold." Scarlett's lips parted slightly. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I think I'd like the company." And just like that, the house wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a beginning. She didn't know it yet. He didn't either. But that rainy night on a forgotten highway would become the first chapter in a story none of them expected. The kind that changes everything, and that's the thing about love, about healing. Sometimes it doesn't come with fanfare or grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with a stranger, a storm, and a door left open. What do you think? If you were in Tom's shoes, would you? Trust a complete stranger and give them shelter. Play it safe and keep your door closed. Comment below. Or B, and let's talk about the risks we are willing to take for someone in need. Healing doesn't always look like some dramatic revelation. More often, it arrives in quiet ways: an unexpected laugh, the smell of dinner wafting from the kitchen, the sound of a child's footsteps echoing through a hallway that used to carry only silence. That was what began to unfold for Tom in the days after Scarlett and Johnny entered his home. Not a miracle, but a slow, almost imperceptible restoration. It started with routine. Tom, a man who had let himself become untethered from structure after Emma left, now found himself returning home with intention. The first time he caught himself checking the clock and thinking, "I should head back early. Johnny might be waiting to play," it stopped him in his tracks. That simple thought, thinking of someone else's need over his own spiral, was something he hadn't done in a long time. Evenings, once reserved for whiskey and empty stares at the wall, took on a new rhythm. Scarlett often cooked nothing elaborate, just warm, comforting meals that filled the house with a smell Tom had forgotten existed. It wasn't just food, it was memory. He'd sit at the table and eat slowly, watching as Scarlett fed Johnny, asking him about his day, her voice soft and full of a patience Tom admired. Sometimes, Johnny would run up to him after dinner with a wooden block or a toy car, asking for help fixing something, and Tom, who had spent a lifetime mastering machines, found his rough hands fumbling through delicate play. One evening, Johnny came to him with a busted toy truck. Tom knelt beside him, examining it with exaggerated seriousness, then spent the next 20 minutes piecing it back together with a screwdriver and a flashlight. When the wheels finally turned again and Johnny clapped with joy, Tom felt a strange pressure in his chest. Not pain, not grief, something else entirely: fulfillment. Scarlett noticed it too. She never said anything directly, but the way she looked at Tom was different than in those first days, less guarded, less uncertain. One night, as they washed dishes side by side, she turned to him and said, "You're good with him, you know." He's never had that before. Tom didn't know how to respond. So he just nodded, his throat too tight for words. The house began to transform along with him. Rooms that had gathered dust were cleaned. The couch cushions were fluffed and rearranged. The broken porch light was fixed. Scarlett had a way of bringing life into dead spaces, not just with her actions, but with her presence. She hummed when she cooked, read stories to Johnny aloud with theatrical flair, and would sometimes leave little notes by the coffee pot. "Don't forget lunch," or "Johnny wants to build a rocket today." And Tom found himself writing back, not long after they settled in, Scarlett opened up one evening over tea. She told Tom about her past, about how she'd trusted the wrong man and ended up pregnant, about how her mother's resentment and jealousy had pushed her onto the streets. She didn't cry, she didn't dramatize it. She simply told it as if it was something she'd carried long enough to no longer need to hide. Tom listened not out of obligation, but because he wanted to understand her. He didn't offer pity or promises, he just said, "You don't have to run anymore," and meant it. She didn't respond with words, but the way her shoulders relaxed told him everything. The next morning, Tom didn't reach for the bottle. For the first time in over a year, he didn't even think about it. Instead, he got up early, made pancakes, and set the table. Johnny wandered in groggy-eyed, rubbing his face, surprised to find breakfast waiting. Scarlett followed shortly after, eyes blinking at the unfamiliar scent. She looked at the table, then at Tom, and smiled a soft, genuine smile that he would remember for the rest of his life. Days became weeks. Tom started showing up to work on time again, grease on his hands, and a sense of pride in his craft returning. His neighbors, Ben and Linda Carey, began to take notice. One afternoon, Tom showed up on their doorstep holding a fresh apple pie Scarlett's doing and thanked them for the opportunity that brought Scarlett and Johnny into his life. Linda, who had quietly worried he might not ever recover, hugged him so tightly that he nearly dropped the pie. But as much joy as Scarlett and Johnny brought, a quiet truth lingered in the back of Tom's mind: this might not be permanent. It was too fragile, too beautiful, to trust completely. He had learned the hard way that people can walk away without looking back. He didn't know how to say it, but every day he feared waking up to an empty house again. Still, he didn't let fear dictate his actions. He bought Johnny a second-hand bike and taught him how to ride it in the gravel driveway. He fixed up the spare bedroom, painting it light blue, adding shelves for toys and books. He found Scarlett reading on the porch one evening and offered her the key to the house, not as a gesture of temporary shelter, but something more. "This isn't just a place to crash anymore," he told her. "It's yours too, if you want it to be." Scarlett didn't say yes right away. She didn't need to. The way she reached out and took his hand said more than words ever could. Healing isn't something you notice while it's happening. It doesn't announce itself with trumpet calls or grand declarations. It creeps in quietly, wraps itself around you in ordinary moments: the warmth of shared meals, the giggle of a child in the hallway, the silence that no longer feels empty. And so, without realizing it, Tom had begun to live again. Not just survive, not just exist, but live with purpose, with connection, and with hope. He thought he had built that house years ago to share with Emma, but maybe, just maybe, he had been building it for Scarlett and Johnny all along. He just hadn't known it yet. If someone came into your life quietly, changed everything without trying, and made your home feel like home again, would you trust it? Oh yes, I'd open my heart again. No, I'd be too afraid to get hurt. Tell me in the comments, and let's talk about the risks and beauty of starting over. It was the kind of afternoon that felt deceptively ordinary: soft sun through the trees, wind playing with the curtains, the smell of cornbread rising from the oven. Scarlett was in the kitchen, humming as she stirred the pot, and Johnny was building a makeshift fort out of couch cushions in the living room. Tom had just gotten home from work, dust on his jeans, and that familiar ache in his shoulders from hours under the hood of a tractor. But it was a good ache, the kind that reminded him life was moving forward. That something real was growing inside the four walls he once thought he'd never fill again. He didn't expect it. No one ever does. He had just stepped into the hallway when the knock came at the front door. It wasn't urgent or aggressive, just a firm, familiar rhythm. It stirred something in him, a memory, a ghost. He wiped his hands on a towel, opened the door, and there she was. Emma. She stood there as if she belonged there. Her hair was pulled back the way it used to be, her posture still exuding that effortless confidence she always wore like armor. But the years had left their mark. Her eyes were harder now, less naive. Her lips curled into a smirk that wasn't quite a smile. "Hi, Tom," she said, like no time had passed. He blinked once, then again, as if trying to clear away an illusion. "What are you doing here?" Emma stepped inside without waiting for permission, her gaze sweeping over the living room. Johnny froze behind his fort, unsure what to make of this sudden stranger. "I just wanted to see how you were," she said, her voice light but controlled, as though she were performing. "It's been a long time." Tom didn't respond. He followed her with his eyes as she moved around the room, like a woman inspecting what had once been hers. Her fingers grazed the mantelpiece, her eyes landing on a small drawing Johnny had taped to the wall, a rocket ship with stick figures beneath it labeled me, Mommy, and Tom. Her expression faltered for a brief second, then it hardened. "So ... This is what you've been up to," she said, turning to face him, "a child and ... a housemate." Tom's jaw tightened. "Her name is Scarlett. And that boy is Johnny." Emma tilted her head. "Are they living here?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She already knew. "Interesting," she said, her tone cool, almost clinical. "Because, last I checked, we're still legally married. Which means this house, it's half mine, and if I'm here. I don't think you have room for extra guests." Tom took a step forward, his voice low. "You left, Emma. You didn't just leave me, you took the money I'd saved. You walked out without a word for 3 years. You don't get to come back and claim what you abandoned." Emma smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Legally, I still can, unless you want to fight me in court. And we both know how small towns love a scandal." She dropped onto the couch, the same couch where Johnny had fallen asleep just 2 nights ago, with a book in his lap, and crossed her legs with a confidence that had once disarmed him, but now only disgusted him. Tom stood still, fury surging beneath the surface. But it wasn't just anger he felt, it was grief. For who she used to be, for the years he had spent clinging to a love that had rotted in his hands. Scarlett stepped into the room quietly, sensing the tension in the air. She looked at Emma, then at Tom. "Do you want me to take Johnny to the bedroom?" she asked softly. Tom nodded, "Please." Once they were out of earshot, he turned back to Emma. "This house was built by my hands, brick by brick. You didn't care about it when you walked away. Don't pretend it matters now." Emma stood slowly, the facade cracking ever so slightly. "You think you've moved on with her? You think that's real?" Tom took a deep breath. He didn't want this to turn into shouting. He didn't want Johnny to hear things no child should. "I don't think anything," he said calmly. "I feel it every day, in the quiet, in the warmth that's come back into this place. Something I never had with you." "Not really." Emma's face darkened. "If you won't make room for me, I'll force it. I'll make sure the whole town knows what kind of man you are. You think she won't leave you the moment things get hard? She's just another broken girl looking for a place to hide." Tom didn't react. He watched her, the storm inside him now eerily quiet. Then he said something she didn't expect. "Take the house." Emma blinked. He continued, "You can have it, every inch. I'll walk away. Scarlett, Johnny, and I will start again somewhere else. Because I won't let you poison this place any more than you already have." She opened her mouth to protest, but the wind had left her sails. She wanted a fight. She wanted him to cling to her. But all he gave her was indifference. That night, he packed. Not much, just the essentials. Scarlett watched him from the hallway, unsure if she should speak. When she finally did, her voice trembled. "You're giving it all up?" He looked at her. "This place isn't worth losing peace over. You and Johnny, that's what matters. Home is not a house. I know that now." She didn't say a word. She just walked over, placed her hand on his chest, and leaned in, forehead to his ... By morning, they were gone. Emma remained, alone in the house she fought for. But she didn't win, because what she took was empty. What Tom walked away with was everything. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do isn't holding on. It's letting go, without bitterness, without regret, not because you're weak, but because you've finally understood what's worth fighting for and what's not. The snow was beginning to melt, though patches of white still clung to the roots of trees and the corners of fences like stubborn remnants of a season that refused to let go. Winter was waning, and with it, so were the last traces of the man Tom used to be. The man who once lived in shadows, who walked through silence with a glass in his hand and nothing but ghosts to keep him company. That man had quietly died months ago. Now, there was something different in the way Tom moved. He walked with purpose again, not just obligation. His mornings were no longer an exercise in endurance. They began with the scent of coffee, the soft murmurs of a child waking from dreams, and the clatter of breakfast being prepared in a small kitchen filled with warmth. He had left the house he built with Emma behind. He didn't look back. Scarlett, Johnny, and Tom found shelter in the Carey home, a modest but loving place offered freely by Ben and Linda, who had long ago stopped seeing Tom as just a neighbour. They had become something more, something closer. The kind of people who knew how to open their door without asking questions, the kind who understood that sometimes starting over meant surrendering everything familiar. Scarlett fit into that new space with a kind of grace that couldn't be taught. She cooked, cleaned, and cared for Ben, whose health had worsened with age, and for Linda, who was aging faster under the weight of it. But she didn't do it out of duty, she did it because she was one of them now. Because her heart, though scarred, had never lost its capacity for tenderness. Tom watched all of it quietly, the way men do when they've been broken and learned to rebuild from the inside out. He was no longer trying to impress anyone, no longer chasing a version of himself he thought he had to be. With Scarlett, he was simply Tom, strong, steady, and kind. She didn't ask for more, and somehow, that gave him the strength to give everything. He worked the same job, fixed the same machines, but when he came home, the air was different. Johnny would run to him at the door, his arms outstretched, shouting, "Daddy, look what I built." Tom never corrected him. The first time it happened, Scarlett's eyes had filled with tears, but Tom had only smiled and whispered, "He can call me whatever he wants." The boy had found his father not in blood, but in love. And Tom had found his son in a child who gave his broken heart a place to beat again. Scarlett was carrying his child now. The news had come quietly, on a rainy morning in early February. She'd sat him down, hands nervously wrapped around a cup of tea, and told him, barely above a whisper. He didn't say anything for a long time, just reached across the table, covered her hand with his, and held it. Later that day, he started sketching plans for a nursery. They didn't rush to find a place of their own. The Careys wouldn't hear of it. "You're not guests," Linda had insisted. "You're family now," and they meant it. For the first time in years, the old farmhouse was filled with laughter. Ben, though growing frailer, had a spark in his eye every time Johnny climbed into his lap. Linda, who had once busied herself with puzzles and long silences, now spent her days baking with Scarlett, planning for the baby, filling the kitchen with cinnamon and hope. They had become something unexpected, a family built not by tradition or planning, but by accident, by survival, and by the quiet kind of love that grows when no one is looking. One Sunday evening, they all sat around the dinner table. The sun was setting through the window, casting a golden hue across the worn wooden floor. Johnny, messy with spaghetti sauce, was telling Ben a story about dragons and spaceships. Scarlett leaned against Tom's shoulder, her hand resting over the soft curve of her belly. Linda looked around the table, her voice breaking the silence with a warmth only years could refine. "You know," she said, "I always thought we'd never have a family of our own. And now, here we are." Tom looked up, his voice quiet but firm. "You gave us a place when we didn't have one. That's family. That's more than blood." Johnny lifted his glass of milk with a grin. "To family?" They all raised their glasses. Milk, cider, water, and clinked them gently. No toasts, no fanfare, just a shared glance that said everything. Later that night, as the house fell into its usual hum of stillness, Tom and Scarlett lay in bed, the kind of tired that felt earned. Her back was pressed to his chest, his hand resting just above the soft rise of their child. She spoke into the dark. "I never thought I'd find peace like this." "Not after everything." Tom didn't answer right away. He kissed her temple and whispered, "We found it because we weren't looking for perfect. We just found each other." She smiled in the dark, tears slipping silently onto the pillow. Not from sadness, but from a strange kind of joy, the kind born after loss, after grief, when love chooses you again. Outside, the last of the snow melted under the early touch of spring. The world was warming again, not just the land, but the hearts inside that old house. And for the first time in a long, long while, Tom believed that maybe the past wasn't something to be erased, it was something to grow from. If you had the chance to begin again, truly begin again, but it meant walking through heartbreak first, would you still choose it? Yes, the pain is worth it for the love that follows. B, no, the risk of heartbreak is too great. Let me know in the comments. Oh, B, and let's talk about the cost of second chances. Life has a way of breaking us before it rebuilds us. It humbles the strongest, bends the proudest, and strips away what we once thought made us whole. But in that very breaking, something sacred can happen if we let it. The story of Tom, Scarlett, and young Johnny is not just a tale of chance meetings or second chances. It's a living testament to what happens when pain is not the end of the story, but the beginning of something better. Tom's life could have ended the moment Emma walked away, not physically, but emotionally. There are wounds that bleed unseen, and loneliness is among the cruelest. He could have become bitter, closed off, hardened to love, and for a while, he did. We've all known that temptation to protect ourselves by shutting the world out. But then came a knock at the door. A stranger, soaked in rain, with a little boy clinging to her hand, a moment most would ignore. A burden most would walk past, but he didn't. What followed was not some fairy-tale transformation. It was messy, awkward, painful, real, but slowly, day by day, they each began to thaw. Through meals shared, broken things fixed, laughter rediscovered in unexpected places, they built not a perfect life, but a healing one. What this story teaches us, if we're willing to listen, is that redemption doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in like spring sunlight after a brutal winter. The warmth of belonging, of being needed again, of giving and receiving without fear. It doesn't come through grand gestures, but through daily acts of quiet courage. Scarlett didn't plan to be saved. She had long ago stopped hoping for that, but someone opened the door. Someone saw her not as a burden, but as a human being. And because of that small act of decency, lives changed. A man remembered how to love, a woman remembered how to trust. A child was no longer just surviving, he was thriving. If there is one truth this story drives home, it's that healing is always possible. Even after betrayal, even after abandonment, even after we've told ourselves we're beyond repair. We are never truly alone, not as long as kindness still exists in the world. So what can we take from this? First, never underestimate the power of presence. Just being there for someone, in silence, in patience, without judgment, can change a life. You don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes, all someone needs is to be seen. Second, don't be afraid to start again. No matter your age, your mistakes, or how far you've fallen, it is never too late to rebuild. You are allowed to choose love again. You are allowed to forgive yourself. And finally, recognize that family is not always made of blood. Sometimes, the strongest families are forged in fire, in hardship, in loss, in the willingness to stay when things get hard. We live in a world obsessed with perfection, with speed, with curated happiness. But the most beautiful things grow in the quiet, in the slow, in the soil of second chances. Here's a simple question for you. When was the last time you truly let someone in? Recently, I believe in second chances. B, it's been a while, I'm still learning how to trust again. Let me know your answer in the comments. Just write or B, and feel free to share your story if you're comfortable. Others might find strength in your words. And if this story touched something deep in you, I'd truly appreciate your support. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue to share stories that matter. If you'd like to support the channel financially, even a small donation goes a long way. I'm not a young man anymore, but I've dedicated this stage of my life to doing something meaningful, to sharing lessons that might ease someone's pain, offer hope, or simply remind us of our shared humanity. So if you've found value here, help me keep going. Subscribe, comment, share, or donate what you can. Because the world needs more stories of hope, and maybe, just maybe, you're the one who helps us tell the next one.